Lots of personal finance books are incredibly boring. They tell you what you can't do. Don't do this, don't do that. Cut back on cappuccino, cut back on fun, cut back, cut back, cut back. How about being told how to actually make your first million? Well, you don't have to wonder anymore, because my next guest book is an easy to understand guide to financial freedom. Only, 5 out of every 100 people will reach a point where they can live off the income of their savings and investments in retirement. 5%. Is it you, your neighbour, or is it somebody down the road who's getting it right? This is the MoneyMakers. I'm Bruce Whitfield. I'm joined by Galileo Capital Director, financial advisor and author twice, Warren Ingram, to talk about his brand new book, How to Make Your First Million. And I wrote the foreword, so I must just say I'm not captured, but I have read the book and I have had deep insight into it. Educate us on how to make the first million, Warren Ingram, while I go and have a beer.
Thanks, Bruce. I think the secret is to make it your way, and that's the starting point. So as you were saying, a lot of the time we create a formula and say that you have to do it exactly this way, there's no other way, and it's all about cutting back, and yes, that is unfortunately part of the deal. You can't spend more than what you earn forever and expect to get rich. But at the same time, if you're a little bit disciplined and you set some kind of a game plan for yourself, there are many different ways of making your first million, whether it be in property, and you know how much I love making money out of property.
Now, when you talk about property, and this is important for people who don't know you as the cantankerous, reluctant residential property investor. You don't believe that residential property is an investment. Entry costs are too high, exit costs are too high, taxes on the one side, estate agents on the other. If you don't stay there long enough, at best you come out flat if you sell within 5 or 7 years.
Correct.
So property, to your mind, is not a great investment. Not listed property, however, you're not averse to that.
Listed property,
right.
Yeah. So in the book, though, we have case studies of 8 different people.
Real people, human beings. Living, breathing human beings.
And people that are not sort of, the Bill Gateses and the Warren Buffetts and the Mark Zuckerbergs. These are people that have achieved sustainable money, and they've done it in very different ways. So there are people in there that have done it in property. So belying or I guess making not a lie of my point, but I think maybe by exception proving the rule. And then we've got people that have started life with actually backwards, with really tough times, and they found ways to build up their capital. And I think probably the common thread through all of them is they've got some kind of a vision in terms of what they're doing, why they're doing this, why they're willing to make sacrifices, whether it be financial or working harder, etc., and then they're willing to stick to whatever their game plan is. And I think that's really what makes all these people so exceptional. But it's something that any of us can do. Even I can do it. Even I can do it. It's not that difficult. And if I can do it, that means anybody can do it.
Now, okay, when you say anybody, there's a homeless guy on the corner on my way to work. He's not going to do this. I mean, when you say anybody, please qualify anybody. Anybody earning 3,500 Rand a month is not going to make their first million anytime soon. People earning 35,000 Rand a month are going to struggle. If you're earning 100,000 Rand, sure, I get it. You've got an opportunity to invest and get to a million Rand at some point in the next decade.
So I think I agree on the 100,000, and I agree on the person who has nothing, who is on the street corner. But the 35,000, no chance. I mean, they can definitely do it. So I disagree completely.
Okay, give me, right, let's do 35,000. Somebody who earns 35,000 Rand probably takes home, 22,000 Rand?
Somewhere around there.
They're 4 kids, and okay, let's not make it too difficult.
Come on.
But they take home 22,000 Rand. There's rent or a bond. There's a car payment to make. There may be a family to sustain. It's not very much money upon which to do that.
So I agree, but you can. It's possible. That's the point here. How would you do it? Well, number one, definitely start renting. Don't go out and buy a property that you now have a huge financial obligation to, unless you're going to stay in that property, as we said, 10 years or longer. And even then, think about it carefully. But for example, if you need to buy a car, be really careful about that. Buy sort of a 3 or 4 year old car that, yes, if you've got family, you need to transport them around, but buy something small. I mean, the Pretoria Mayor has given us all the lead of how to do this. Don't go and spend on the big, luxury cars. Buy something that's small and sustainable. And then, very first point is pay money away to your savings first. That actually needs to be the starting point. That needs to be your priority. You can do it in your retirement fund. Most people forget about that. And if it's not a retirement fund, if your company doesn't have one, do it into a low-cost retirement annuity.
The best part about this book how to make your first million is the case studies, because these are case studies of real breathing individuals, people who have fallen on hard times, people who have lost spouses either through death or divorce, and who have found themselves in desperate circumstances because they're going out to work for the first time in 10 or 15 or 20 years. They may have been the spouse in the relationship who didn't work while the kids were growing up, and they come to you and they say, help. They follow the basic principles that are put forward in this book. Best case example that is most well known is the story of a woman called Julia, who at the age of 27 and a capital amount of 60,000 Rand invested a third, jawled on a third and lived, and paid about a third in tax. And she's sustainably done that for a decade now. She's earned well, she lives well, she travels overseas, but her husband drives her old Corsa Light. And they've only just recently bought a house. They live the principles of not robbing themselves, but of an element of frugality.
And I think someone like Julia is probably the reason why this book exists, because in the beginning it was an inspiring story, and then we started to get feedback from people saying, hang on, but I mean, she's exceptional, and there's no one else like Julia. And I kept saying there are lots of people like Julia, and that have done it in lots of ways. And so here are the real people that have done it in many different ways. And I think the one thing I find that we have in common is we all give ourselves excuses not to do things. We all give ourselves great reasons as to why we can't save, why we can't get fit, or whatever the deal is. And I think these case studies really show you that actually, if you read their stories, you really can't give yourself excuses, because there are a lot of people here that have had devastating setbacks, but they bounced, they found their groove in life, and they stuck to their knitting.
Now, one of the criticisms of a book like this might be that this is a typical end of cycle book. We've seen markets perform spectacularly from the advent of democracy up until about 3 years ago. There's 20 years there of spectacular market growth where you could throw money at virtually any index on the JSE and you would have made money. Sure. Markets are pretty much flatlined over the last 3 years. Do the rules still apply for the last 3 years and the next 3, 5 and 10 as have applied on the history you've looked at, which is, say, a 20-year history?
Well, in fact, the part of the history here goes back to 1900. We've been through enough cycles in 1900 that this always applies. And I think the second point is it's not really just about stock markets. I feel like I'm talking about property all the time now, but we're talking about property in the book as well. And surely that's long after a bull market in the property market in South Africa. So I think there are many different ways here. There are many approaches that you can follow. And to me, they are timeless. Some of this is really about principles, and then some of it's about practical steps that you take to take control. But you have to have the discipline. You have to find something that drives you to say, I'm willing to do this every day. There's something that's as important enough for me to do this as it is to give up that cappuccino we were talking about.
Now, what strikes me about the case studies in this book is you are almost as blown away by your clients who come to you with a commitment as they are by some of the results that they get.
And I think because that 100 people example that you're talking about, so 5 out of 100 people make it, and to me that already is devastating, because I think it's really not. I know it's difficult, but that's not the same as being complicated and etc. So to me that's a starting point. So when you meet these people that have got it right, and often they've got it right despite so many different things, it is astounding. And then you talk to them and they don't even believe they're exceptional very often. You'd say to them, this is incredible. And I remember the one lady in the book, whose husband died on her when she was very young with 2 young kids, saying to me, and she's in her 60s now, and I said to her, you're amazing. And she said, I don't agree. Surely there are lots of people like me, and the numbers don't tell us that. The numbers tell us she's 5 out of 100.
No, but and also the rules are universal. I mean, any personal finance book you read in the world will say, start young, invest a substantial proportion of your earnings from a young age, keep at it in good times and in bad, reinvest the dividends, and growth over time will follow. There'll be hiccups, there'll be blips, there'll be moments of sheer terror and abandonment and angst and pain and anguish, but try and ignore those.
And I think that's where investment success comes in, is when you can, with good logical reasons, act differently to the herd mentality of markets, whatever those markets are. So you don't get too excited when everyone else is telling you that things are fantastic and you should commit all your money to the next Ponzi scheme or whatever the deal is. And I guess on the flip side, when people are panicking and they're predicting, as we're talking about now, that there's going to be flat growth for the next few years, investing is kind of a waste of time. That's pretty much the time you should be saying to yourself, hang on, if everybody's saying that, that's probably a great time to ratchet up my savings, to really gear it up, because everyone else is running for the door. I'm going to go in and take advantage.
Capitalism is dead, markets are dead, markets are a casino.
And I think people will be saying that in 50 years' time in the capitalist system. I think you need to find a way to allow people to be rewarded for their efforts, and so capitalism's not dead. Maybe it's got a few warts which need to be burnt off now, but that's not the same as saying, let's abandon the system and come up with the next version of socialism. We know it doesn't work. I mean, please, that's surely a debate that's now long dead. It's like saying, do you invest in shares or in indices? It's not one or the other anymore. Surely there's a way forward.
Your first book, How to Become Your Own Financial Advisor, and now this book, How to Make Your First Million. I would almost argue that one needs to read this first before the one that you wrote first. I mean, you did do this back to front.
Well, this book wasn't going to be a plan. There wasn't a plan to write this book.
You didn't have a plan? You're a financial advisor. Of course you had a plan.
The first one was the plan.
Right.
And I thought that was it. I thought the job was done. And then I started getting more and more feedback from people saying, hang on, this is great, but the investment side, you didn't give us enough detail and enough examples of how we can do it. And obviously any author is kind of touchy to criticism, but I sulked for about 6 months and then got over myself, and this is the result, is saying, okay, great, so if you've got all the principles on how to become your own financial advisor, that covers everything, insurances, your will, etc., then there is space and demand for a more investment focused book, and that's why it exists.
There we go. Warren Ingram, who is the author of How to Make Your First Million. It's a go-to South African guide on how to do it. Local stories, local examples. He's no Susie Orman. He doesn't have her hair or her teeth, but he does have expertise, he does have advice, and he does have some very real-world examples. Also, this isn't his path to riches either. If you bother to read the foreword which I wrote, and I'm not going to ask him about this because you'll blush and it's all embarrassing, but he's not going to make a cent out of this book. Blush? No, he can't do it on cue. He's not going to make a single cent out of this book. He set up a trust called the Serendipity Trust, with the spoils from the first book going to educate young people, and the spoils from this book and from any future books. Have you started the next one?
No, not yet. I'll get there.
And the spoils from future books will go into the Serendipity Trust, and that money will be used to educate young South Africans. It's about sustainability. It's about paying it forward. Galileo Capital financial advisor, director, and now author, second time round, Warren Ingram. More money-making advice and lessons to impart on future money makers. Till next time, thank you for watching. Good night and sleep well.